Good evening and welcome to the National Building Museum. Great to see such a packed crowd. My name is Scott Kratz. I'm the Vice President for Education here at the National Building Museum. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's presentation. For those of you who might not know, the National Building Museum advances the quality of the built environment by educating people about its impact on their lives. We do this through innovative exhibitions, through youth outreach programs, and events such as this evening's. Something that sets us apart from other institutions is our interdisciplinary approach to the built environment, and the profession of planning is a critical element how the museum fulfills its mission. We feature planners in lectures, panel discussions, and on advisory committees as we plan programming and exhibitions. We are especially proud to present tonight's program with our long-term partner, the American Planning Association. The museum has partnered with APA in many ways over the years. They are Corinthian members of the museum, have been a supporter of our exhibition and programs, including serving as the presenting sponsor of our exhibition Green Community that explored the past, present, and future of sustainable towns and cities. We also have a long-standing collaborative effort programming series with APA called the L'Enfant Lecture on City Planning and Design that draws attention to critical issues in city and regional planning in the United States. Over the years, we featured leading figures in planning, architecture, urban design, governance, and other fields. We look forward to our next collaborative program in early 2013. Now with that, I'm delighted to present Mitchell Silver, AICP, a good friend of the National Building Museum. Mitchell is president of the American Planning Association and the Chief Planning and Economic Development Officer for Raleigh, North Carolina. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mitchell Silver.
Good evening, and thank you, Scott, for that kind introduction. I know he's not here, but I'd also like to thank Chase Rind and the National Building Museum for their continued partnership and hospitality in hosting tonight's Daniel Burnham Forum on Big Ideas Lecture. APA and the Building Museum have worked together for more than a decade on presenting and hosting thought-provoking lectures, exhibits that explore the role and impact of planning. Tonight's lecture is no different. We are honored to have Eugenie Birch, FAICP, who happens to be my mentor, as a featured speaker for our second Daniel Burnham Forum on Big Ideas. APA launched the Daniel Burnham Forum this past July to examine the ideas, issues, and challenges that are facing America's communities now and in the future. Addressing these issues require new heights of creativity, energy, and innovation. It is important to have these conversations to help lead America's communities toward a more just and sustainable future. To facilitate this conversation, the forum will include a series of lectures that will occur around the country. Ladies and gentlemen, I now introduce Paul Farmer, who will introduce Eugenie Birch. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mitch, and I realize that I'm wedged between a proud student and a proud faculty member. So congratulations to both of you. But tonight we are really honored to have a respected leader of the planning profession who will share her thoughts with us on how international trends will affect domestic decisions today and in the coming decades. There will be some time at the end of Eugenie's talk for questions, and I hope that everyone will stay after that for our reception here at the museum. Our featured speaker is the Lawrence C. Nussdorf Professor of Urban Research and Education at the University of Pennsylvania, Chair of the Graduate Group in City Planning at Penn, and founding co-director of the Penn Institute for Urban Research. Eugenie's accomplishments are so numerous that I'll just mention a few. She's a fellow of the American Institute of Certified Planners, an honorary member of the Royal Town Planning Institute, and currently serves as president of the International Planning History Society and an associate editor of JAPA, the Journal of the American Planning Association, which is the world's leading peer-reviewed journal on planning, development, and policy. And I would like to add that in a previous time, Eugenie served as the editor of JAPA and served with great distinction. Thank you, Eugenie. Your work still is used, I'm sure, in classrooms around the world. And last year, she was a co-convener of the Changing Cities Linking Global Knowledge to Local Action 3-day seminar in Hawaii that included urban experts and scholars from across Asia and the United States. She's published widely in planning history and contemporary urban revitalization and served as a co-editor of several publications, including Women's Health on the World Cities, Global Urbanization, and Growing Greener Cities, Urban Sustainability in the 21st Century. Eugenie has been a visiting scholar or professor at Queen's University, the University of Hong Kong, and other universities. She currently serves as co-chair of the United Nations World Urban Campaign, and I had the privilege of being with Eugenie just a couple of nights ago in this week of the opening of the UN's activities, where she presented to a series of New Yorkers the focus of the World Urban Campaign and UN Habitat's World Urban Forum that many just recently attended. So with that impressive but actually very abbreviated biography, I'd like to turn the podium over to Dr. Eugenie Birch.
Thank you very much, Mitch and Paul. It's a real pleasure to be here. I think this forum has taken on a tradition, and that tradition is not only to have some interesting speakers, hopefully, but also to be in beautiful places. The first forum, as you can see from this image, was in Chicago in a beautiful, adaptively reused facility, and it provided a beautiful environment for the kickoff of this particular activity. And here you see the three speakers, the president of the ASLA, the president of the AIA, and our very own Mitch Silver, the president of the APA. Now, when they spoke, they each had a message, and they each had a message that I thought I ought to sort of translate and try to find what the common themes were, because I think we want to take some of these common themes, explore them, and see where we have some resonance among different professionals and resonance for ourselves. So, when the president of the ASLA spoke, each speaker was asked to mention what he or she thought were the critical issues, the critical problems that we need to confront in the next 50 years. You can see her list here. It was the economy, demography, social change, public health, urban planning and land use. That was very nice to see that she recognized that. And transportation. When we moved on to the president of the AIA, he started off with the digital revolution, technology, and how that's changed things. Urbanization, climate change, water, and the monetization, or the privatization, I think he really meant, of the public realm. And then it was Mitch. And Mitch came up with his list, which was regionalism. How can we think about metropolitan areas, not just cities? Demography, of course, what's happening to the population in the United States in terms of its composition, in terms of its location. The public health issues that we're confronting, particularly things like obesity, water seems to be everywhere, climate change, and he had a new twist at the end, zoning and land management. Now, each one of them had some pithy things to say in terms of how we would solve or address these problems. The landscaper said, of course, we're going to do sustainable sites. And the architect said, well, we're going to do low-impact development. And we said, inclusive compact development. All right, so we each have our cut on this. The landscape architect says it's really important to educate people. And the architects think we need to have a shared common vision. I don't think anyone would disagree with that. And again, Mitch, very practical, said, wait a minute, we have to show the value of long-range planning. After all, no one's going to listen to us unless we do that. And finally, they left us with some warnings. We must be vigilant. We must control the conversation. And again, Mitch told us, don't get too comfortable because things are changing. So that led me to think about what we would do with this talk, this big ideas talk. It was a very challenging thing after those three phenomenal speakers. I want to bring to your attention that this is our time. This is our time as city and regional planners. It's our time because we've finally been discovered. Not that we've been discovered, but that our interest in the area that we're working on has been discovered. Everyone from the economists and other journalists to international lending organizations like the World Bank that never spoke about cities in the past now are talking about cities. Foreign Policy Magazine this fall dedicated its whole fall issue to this topic. UN Habitat is coming up with new ways of looking at cities. No longer are they a problem, they say. They're the key to prosperity. And we have scholars, we have Ed Glazier, who's there talking about the triumph of the city. This is our time. It's our time, and what are we going to do with it? That's the real question. Well, first of all, if we want to be part of the conversation, and if we're going to be vigilant, and if we're not going to get too comfortable, one of the first things we need to do is look around, take our heads out of the sand, because we have spent an awful long time with our heads in the sand, I as much as anybody, and not thinking, not really consciously taking a look at what's happening in the rest of the world in terms of urbanization, while all these other folks are doing it in the press and so forth. What are we doing to think about that? And so we, of course, are very familiar with the urban population growth, what's happening in the economy, but there are three big problems, I think, that we're going to see resonating in the world that are going to have huge impact on our world and whether we're going to be able to do those sustainable sites, those low-impact communities, and inclusive, low-compact cities. We have to know a little bit more about what's happening in the world and it's happening in our nation in order to become in alignment. I think if you look at this chart, you'll see that there's a theme here. The theme, of course, is growth. The other theme is technology. If every time there's a technological change, something occurs that allows for the population to grow. And if you look at the very tail end of this chart, right when we start getting water mills and wind and go right up to oil and gas and electricity, you can see in terms of population what happens. It explodes. 1,000 years ago, wow, look what happened. We go from a million people to 7 million people in a pretty relatively short time. And that's something for us to think about, basically, when we're thinking about urbanization or thinking about world population growth, which is the pace and trajectory with which it is happening. It is really key to understand that. Now, why it happened in the past, of course, was that these pieces of technology allowed for the control of water, allowed for the harnessing of energy, that provided the food surpluses, that created the healthy communities that allowed this kind of growth. And as we move forward now into the 20th and the 21st century, this is the city, the century of the city. The century of the city, what does that mean? That means that we are going to have already become 50% urban, but in the next couple of decades, we're going to go over the top, 2/3 to 70% urban in the world. Now, that's not a big deal for us here in the United States because we're already there. We're about 80% urban. But it is a big deal in Asia and Africa. And it's a very big deal because, again, of the trajectory and the pace of what's happening. It took us 10,000 years to get the first billion urban people. It took us 40 years to get the last billion people who are living in cities. It'll probably take 18 to 20 years to get the next billion. Imagine that. Imagine that trajectory. Imagine what that means in terms of having to accommodate numbers of people to feed them, to shelter them, to make sure that they are secure in their communities. And where is it going to happen? It's going to happen in two places. We're going to get, if all the projections are correct, something like 2.6 billion more people, in cities. 2.3 billion of them will be in Africa and Asia. Africa and Asia. That's where the action is going to occur. There is a linkage here. When you look at the sizes of these urban populations, there's a linkage between the size of the urban population and the actual or growing level of economic prosperity. And that is the message that all of the popular writers, the international bankers, the NGOs are seeing, and that's why they're there. Now, where is this growth going to happen? We said Africa and Asia. Everybody thinks it's going to happen in the megacities. And here's the list, the current list of the megacities. And down in the lower left-hand corner, you can see what being in a megacity might mean if you're in Jakarta and you're trying to get home for dinner. There's the traffic. There are only 23 of them. There are only 23 of them, and they only hold today about 10% of the world's urban population. And in fact, half of the world's population lives in places under 500,000. Under 500,000. The other lives in places over 500,000, but about 2/3 of them live in the 94% of cities that are somewhere between 500,000 and 5 million. All right? So the majority of urban people are living in relatively, I'm saying relatively, because we're talking about the scale of cities that we're talking about. They're not that small, but they're relatively small compared to the mega region. And as you can see in the map in the upper corner, the location and sizes and the percent urban of various places of the world today. That map will change. Here, and I'll give you a sneak peek of what they think will be the mega cities, even though there'll be only about 40 of them. Maybe 39, I think. What's it say? 37 there, 37. But there will be over 1,000, possibly 1,500 cities that will be in this other category that we're talking about. Have you ever been to Urumqi, China? Do you know where Urumqi is? And who knows where it is? It's in the Xinjiang area. It's where they had some ethnic issues last fall. And basically, that's a town out there, 1,600 miles from Beijing. 2.3 million people are living there. You never heard of it, right? How about Kaohsiung, Taiwan? I'm sure you've heard of Kaohsiung, right? No? Another 2.3 million people living on the tip of Taiwan. And it's 214 miles from Taipei. I was there last year. I took the high-speed rail. Took an hour and a half to get there. Zooming through Taiwan, connecting the major port. It's a major port in Asia with the capital and mainland China eventually. So there are lots of places like this. Lots of places, and it's time to take our geography books out and learn about them because they're going to affect us. They're going to affect us because their economies are growing. And as their economies are growing, their demand for things and things that we have taken for granted is growing. Everything from consumer goods. When we think about the gross domestic product and what it's composed of, there's a list on the side there, you can see. Everything from personal consumption expenditures, your car, your food, your home, your bank, the fact that you import or export things, and what our government is spending, both on defense and non-defense activities. When we looked at our economy, we can see that there's a big hole right here because we're doing a lot of importing, both of particular kinds of goods, consumer goods, but also those things that supply our economy, energy products. And we'll be talking about that later. We're still dominant. We're still the largest economy in the world. Our growth last quarter was 1.3%. Our unemployment is 8%. We're not happy with those numbers because we're used to higher numbers on the growth side and lower numbers on the employment side. China is suffering too a little bit. They had 10% growth last year, 9-point-something. They're down to 7.6. They have a 6.5% unemployment rate, so they're suffering too. But they are working hard to catch up with us, as are many of these other countries. And as these countries become more populous, more urban, tastes change, consumer demand will rise, and it will rise according to one's ability to pay, obviously. And there are huge issues in the world with regard to the separation of the ability of people to pay, the income divide that we know around the world. And here are just some indicators of this. This lady here would like water. This lady here would like a decent home. This lady here, and she lives here, this lady here wants education for her children, she wants clothes, she wants maybe a bigger apartment or something like that. She's eating more meat and dairy and more protein, and so is she probably. So we see pressures on food, we'll see pressures on production. These people are living out here, the distance from the city because it's safer or it's cheaper or whatever reason they have to live there. They have to get to where they want to be. They're buying cars. They're going to put pressure on the global energy piece. These people will also put pressures on different parts of their economies for the production of goods and services. Now, we've commonly measured all of this in the GDP, looking at the gross domestic product. I just want to bring to your attention that UN Habitat has just published its State of the World Cities, which it does every year. And up to this year, it's always been sort of a negative look at cities. This year, they turned around and said, no, we're going to measure cities for their prosperity, but we're not just going to look at prosperity in terms of economic product. We're going to be looking at quality of life factors, equity factors, and so forth. In other words, what they're trying to do is give the economists a new way of judging and creating indices for how to judge how successful a place is. Now, this has been a large conversation the economists have been having ever since the Stiglitz Commission of a few years ago that was put into place by the French president at the time, who was very disgusted by what happened with the financial crisis and said, hey, you economists, you better tell us, what's really happening. And now the economists are thinking about different ways of measuring prosperity, and UN Habitat, being the center of human settlements, is working on an index to do that. It's presumably quite controversial. You might want to take a look at it. You can go to their website. But not only do we have these issues with regard to population growth, expanding population economies, but we also have global conditions that we need to pay attention to. Clearly, the question of water. I'm not going to deal too much with that. The APA has an enormous initiative on this with regard to flooding and other activities, but I think we can deepen our interest in that area. And we can also deepen our interest in the food security question. Again, I'm not going to deal with that a tremendous amount, but just give you one little factoid, which is to feed the growing population that we expect to see, we're going to have to produce more food than we produced for 5,000 years. So just to give you a sense of the scale of what we're dealing with. We need, as planners, to begin to think about the scale of the issues that are affecting the world that are going to, of course, affect our world here in the United States. And we, of course, are experts in land, and I just put this here to give you a sense that land is not really a problem from the point of view of not having enough land to accommodate people. It's having the right kinds of land, and it's protecting that land, and it's stewarding that land so it can do the things that it needs to do to create the communities of lasting value. And that's where we definitely fit in. And we need to think about land not just on its surface, as we so frequently do, but we need to think about it as in its depths and what happens throughout. So that brings me to the issue of energy. Energy, I think, is one of the most important elements of the world considerations today, because without a reliable and safe source of energy, we do not have a healthy economy, we do not have a healthy environment, and we do not have a healthy social compact. So I think we as planners really need to be thinking a lot more about energy. Certainly wasn't in my education. I'm afraid it wasn't in Mitch's, and I don't know how many of you have really looked at energy in terms of where it comes from, what are the sources beyond the renewable. We're all very active about thinking about renewable, but what do we really know about this? What the effects of energy are on density and design and so forth. We haven't grabbed this as a subject as planners. And so what I wanted to do tonight is to talk a lot about energy, world energy, and then energy in the United States, so that we can begin to think about how we can meld our skills as planners to be in the conversation about energy. If we're going to show our value as planners, if we're going to be controlling the conversation, and we have to be vigilant, then we have to know a little bit about this particular issue. So, we're good at this. We're good at buildings. We're good at systems. We can talk about all of those things. So that's City Planning 101. And that's what we need to show the people who are dealing with energy. But what do we know about this? What do we know about power? We know a fair amount about transport, but this particular side, I don't think we're as strong as we might be. And all of these things have implications for social and economics. And what links them together is their role in land. So, why are we concerned about energy? We're concerned about it clearly, as we've heard all of our politicians talk about, because of energy security. We use something like 19+ million barrels of oil a day in the United States. 19 million. And of those, we import over 8 million. All right? So when they're talking about energy security, they're talking about that in some degree. So for us, we're very concerned about having enough energy because that will support our economy and the lifestyle to which we've become accustomed. In other parts of the world, they're concerned about equity. They're concerned about having, first of all, mothers cook their dinner not over a coal stove, but over some sort of energy that's not going to give her a lung disease. They're concerned about making sure that everybody has energy, and they're not just tapping into it in this particular manner, as the billion people who live in informal settlements in the global south are. And they're concerned, as 600 million people in India this summer were concerned, with being able to get on the train at night or turn on the lights at night. I don't know if you noticed in July what happened with that colossal failure of energy. Big problems there. And the third reason, obviously, that we're concerned about is because of global warming and the fact that the energy we use, the energy products are creating a situation that is going to contribute to global warming. And we can see in terms of who's contributing to that, in terms of percentages, where we are on this particular scale and where the rest of the world is on this particular scale. And don't forget, linking back to what's going to happen in the future in terms of population growth, Asia and Africa are going to become much more active in the use of energy. So, where does the world get its energy from? The whole use of energies, and it's in numbers that you can't even explain here. But basically, coal is a big number, oil is a big number, natural gas is a big number, nuclear is and was a big number, but it's going to shrink because of what happened it's going to shrink in Japan, it's growing in China. Hydro is a renewable, and all the other renewables that we're talking about, wind, geothermal, solar, are over here. All right? So when we're giving our attention to energy as planners, where do you think we ought to be giving our attention? Tell me. Renewables, Mitch says. Well, what do you think? What do you think? Nobody thinks anything? There's a lot of fossil fuel up there, and how are we going to manage this fossil fuel in a way that is not going to contribute to the problems we just talked about before? I love renewables, but in my lifetime, I don't know how much longer I'm going to live, but I don't think renewables are going to get to this proportion or this proportion or this proportion. That's what we're up against. That's what we've got to be thinking about. We can't be, I mean, of course we can support the renewable activity. Of course we can. Of course, as city planners in our own communities, we're passing laws to accommodate it and so forth. And we're supportive of it. But when push comes to shove, we are vastly reliant on these sources of energy, and we need to be thinking very hard about how we can contribute to a better usage or perhaps a reduction or a different proportion among these particular elements. And here we are in terms of just this wonderful graphic showing GDP of the world and the relationship between GDP and energy consumption. If you're a fat country in terms of having a 15 trillion economy or 7.2 trillion economy, you're a fat country in terms of energy production use. And by type, it's electricity, it's oil. Okay? Electricity and oil, electricity, oil. What kind of uses? Take a look. Our residential and services are here, transport is here, industry is here. And as we go forward, according to the scenario builders, these proportions aren't changing tremendously, but the question we should be asking is where can we insert ourselves to figure out how to affect what these graphs are showing us? Because all these graphs are models that have been built by the analysts who are thinking about how we're using it now and how we probably will use it in the future. Transport, oil, there it is. No surprise, right? All of us want to get our electric vehicles. Well, they're down there somewhere. Where? Right up there. Okay, by 2030. What's going to happen to car ownership? Well, here we are up here. Actually, I don't know if anybody saw the article in the Wall Street Journal last week. No, in The Economist. It was about the peak driving, arguing that the Western countries are probably have reached their peak in driving. The next generation, the younger generation, is getting their licenses later. They're driving less. They're living closer to places, so they're not driving as much. But it's down here in the developing world, of course, where we're going to see major changes. So what does this mean for cities and energy? Let's just go quickly through this. All right. Population plus GDP, level of urbanization, equals the amount of energy we do. So let's look at the various factors of energy, and let's look where we are on this slide. Okay. Remember I told you 19 million barrels a day. Our share is 21% of that in the world, and a little less than half of that is imported. What does it go to? Gasoline, jet fuel, diesel, and other products having to do with the petrochemical industry and with the agricultural industry. Coal, world consumption of coal. All these energy pieces come in all different kinds of denominations, but you saw the chart before, you know how much we're consuming of what. So this amount of coal, world, our share, 17%. Gas, 113 trillion cubic feet, we use about 50% of it. Renewables, 16% of the world energy is in renewables, and I couldn't figure out exactly how much is, but only 8% of our energy comes from that, in our usage. There's another piece of the energy picture that we don't look at a whole lot, and that's water. We know we need water for agriculture, and in fact, most people think agriculture in the United States is the greatest use of water. Well, it's not. It's not. It's the production of electricity. Half the water that we take from our rivers, lakes, and seashores goes to the production of electricity, the cooling, the steam, etc. To refine a barrel of oil, remember how many we're using every day, 19 million plus. We use that many gallons of water, and therefore this amount of water daily just to feed our energy needs. So when we talk about water, we need to talk about it within the concept of thinking about its relationship not only to our bath and our shower and our drinking and our cleaning, but into our very way of life and the energy that we depend on for our economy and for our very living. So, there are things that we need to think about in terms of how we live, and I'm just going to quickly go through some of these elements in terms of the energy piece. I don't know if you saw the article, the two-part article about data farms. That's your computer and my computer and the internet, and the fact we think we're saving the world by having all this work that we're doing at home, and how efficient we are with our use of digital activities. Well, guess what? Worldwide, 30 billion watts of electricity, equivalent of 30 nuclear plants, is what it takes to run the internet system that goes around the world. And where does that electricity get made of? What's it made of? What's its coal is the basic energy, then natural gas, then nuke, and then renewables. Smart grid is something we're thinking about, but again, big energy consumer. Production of electricity itself, and of course food. We know we're going to have to accommodate people, and we know that there's going to be a lot of construction. We've all read Chris Nelson's work about how much of our own construction will occur, but think about what we talked about with the population growth. And Joel Cohen, who is a demographer at Rockefeller University, estimates that basically we'll have to build the equivalent of a city of 1 million every week for the next 40 years to accommodate this population. Think of what that means for energy in terms of what we're going to have to produce to do that. Transportation planners, we think about alternative modes, but we don't. Do we know where this energy, where it comes from to support this energy? And so, if we're talking about bus rapid, sorry about that. Bus rapid transit, we're talking about automobiles, obviously. We're talking about all different ways to consolidate and to become more energy efficient in our transport, but we really haven't done the metrics on what this energy means, and that's something we could do. There are a lot of innovations occurring in the United States and around the world with regard to trying to find new sources of energy and energy efficiencies. Big efforts, particularly here in the United States. I'll just point to 3. In Washington, D.C., there's the big waste-to-energy plant that's being built. New York City has just passed this benchmarking law and also is now requiring all buildings to change its fuel from the highly polluting number 6 to the less polluting number 4 or even natural gas. And the Department of Energy is supporting an enormous energy efficiency project in the Philadelphia Naval Yard. And I'm sure you can think of many things that are going in this area. And in the transport area, of course, we're trying lots of experiments to deal with the transport activity. You like that? So, how do we get innovation? What does it take to get this innovation? Again, this is where we need to be smart and understand how the world works with regard to that. And this is just illustrating the steps that it takes going from government intervention incentives to bringing it to the market and making it happen. But we know, basically, in order to accommodate the populations that we're talking about, this is the kind of investment we need worldwide to accommodate those new people, those cities. And it needs to be in power, it needs to be in natural gas, it needs to be in oil, and all of these areas if we're going to enable them to have the healthy economies and the healthy lives they expect. And this is where we are on renewable energy. We wish it were more, but that's where we are. All right, so what's the domestic impact of all of this? What's going to happen to us? Let's go through some of the same activities that we talked about earlier, population, the economy, and the issues of security. I hope you love this map, because this was done by Paul Farmer's daughter when she was a graduate student and getting her master's of urban planning. And at that time, she was working with a study group, a studio group, which was trying to anticipate what would happen to population growth in the United States in the next 50 years. Because unlike Europe, unlike other places in the world, we are growing, and we expect to grow, and we expect to grow in these particular places, these mega regions. And it's this mega region thinking, I think, that's going to help us enable us to think more clearly about how we ought to be attacking some of these major issues. Now, one of our issues is the economy. You know what this is? Whoops. You know what this is? Those are stacks of $100 bills. That's basically $1 billion, okay? So if you're wondering what $1 billion looks like, there it is. There's 10,000, there's 100 million, there's $1 billion. That's me. Okay, what is our economy? What is the size of our economy? $15 trillion. What does that look like? Looks like this. Those are those stacks of $100 bills, size of an airplane field, football field, whatever. That's our economy. And these are the components of growth in the last few years. Consumer goods is up here. What's been happening with those? Well, the big push, we are a consumer economy, and the big push, of course, was housing, but that, as you all know, flopped, so to speak. And so you can see that right here, but coming back. Investments in business and other durable goods, and then government spending and imports and exports are down here. Right in this little section is that petroleum importing that we do, because it pushes our trade deficit over the top. So our imbalance in trade of this year, something like that, and as you know, we're importing over 8 million barrels a day at about $100 a barrel, so you can figure out what that's doing. You also should realize that our economy and the nation is largely pushed by 5 states, and 10 states compose maybe 80% of it, just so you realize that. One of the big issues that we're going to hear about Wednesday night, of course, is our debt. This graphic is a nonpartisan graphic. It comes from the Andover Policy School, which basically is showing us the level of debt that we have today. 16.1 trillion, I believe it is. Our debt ceiling is 16.4. Remember what that $1 trillion looked like, the $15 trillion economy looked like? Well, we have a $15 trillion economy and a $16 trillion debt. So that's not so hot, but it's not as bad as many other countries. I think we could, but we need to address it. And who owns it? We own it. China owns it. Insurance companies own it. England owns it. This is an older graphic. I couldn't find a more timely one, but basically this is the distribution of the ownership of our debt. And who did it? Well, I'll share these slides with you. You can take a look at them at your leisure, but you can see different presidents contributed to different amounts of that debt. But we need to deal with that. We also have a water problem, just as many parts of the world, as we well know, and that, of course, is going to have some impact on global warming. And we have the water problem and the food problem that we have to deal with. Again, I don't want to address that. I want to focus on energy tonight, but I would hope another speaker would take up those large issues. They're all just too big to deal with in detail. But here you can see, in terms of our energy expenditure, what it is as part of our GDP. So it's almost 10% of our GDP goes to our energy expenses. And where does it go? Much like the rest of the world, petroleum, natural gas, coal, renewable energy, and nuclear power. And this is a very common graphic that is always put out by a U.S. Energy Agency, which collects the best data in the world on this sort of thing. And it shows you what the sources are for electric power, for residents, industrial, and transportation. So basically, electricity is taking up 40% of our consumption, transportation another 28%, industrial and residential and commercial. So if we want to attack the energy issue, we need to attack it here, and we need to attack it here. This is good news for us, right? because we have some expertise in this. And you can just see what's happening with our oil imports very quickly here. And where does our oil come from that we import? Okay, we have U.S. petroleum is about a little more than half. Our net imports basically come from the Northern Hemisphere. They come from Canada, Venezuela, and Mexico. Very little from Saudi Arabia. Where does it go when it comes? It goes basically to the Gulf Coast. Remember Hurricane Katrina? Remember what happened to the energy situation? Didn't we have to go into our strategic reserves because we were concerned about the price volatility and the amount of energy that we'd have? So concentrate on the Gulf Coast and spread out the others as we need it. All right. Now, these folks told us to be vigilant, control the conversation, and don't get too comfortable. And my question is, how can we do all these things in the United States if we don't even know the energy vocabulary? So I think we need to go back to Energy 101, and we need to look at the sources of our electricity. What's happening to the sources of electricity in the United States today? Do you know? With the power, do you know what's happening? Gas is beginning to replace the coal, and it's beginning to, we used to have more than 50% of our electricity was produced by coal. It's gone down rather dramatically because of the presence of natural gas, but not only the presence of natural gas, but because of the regulatory framework that was put forward under the Clean Air Act. Natural gas is cleaner than coal. Coal plants are highly polluting, and under the recently enacted Clean Air Act, the energy companies had to either invest heavily in their old coal plants, many of them are old, or replace them with something else, which would be cheaper, so they moved to that. And basically, do you know what's happened to our percentage of greenhouse gas emissions in the past year? It's gone down. It's gone down. So we can do all we want with renewables, and hopefully we'll get to renewables, but we really need to be thinking about how we're going to manage what's happening in this area. You saw how important the power sector was to us, and how we manage this piece, because it's highly controversial. It's not, you know. Coal. Where does coal come from and how does it work? Just quickly, these are the coal regions, comes down here, gets processed, ends up in electricity, gets through all this enormous infrastructure that we have throughout the United States that delivers us to it. And if you look regionally, up here, it's all hydro. Why is that? Because of the dam construction we did in the New Deal period. So we were able to support that kind of energy activity. So we've had a past of dealing with big investments in this. What happens with petroleum? Most of it comes to us through pipelines. Whether it comes into the ports that you saw earlier, and this phenomenal port in Louisiana. Do you know about Loop? Anybody hear about Loop? Well, Loop is the Louisiana offshore oil port. As you may or may not know, the oil tankers have gotten larger, and they can't fit in many of our ports. And so in the Gulf Coast, what they've done is create this offshore port where the tanker comes steaming up, lets out a hose, goes into ties up to a buoy first. Some sailor I am, right? Ties up to the buoy, lets the hose out. All that oil gets disgorged over a couple of days, and on it goes on to Louisiana, where it's either refined or it's sent through this pipeline system to the refineries in the Midwest or the East or whatever, but many, many refineries here and here. This whole story is incredibly complex, and it's incumbent upon us to learn about it. And of course, here's the picture of the natural gas situation. You know the big story here, the Marcellus and Utica Shale, which is gas, the Bakken, which is oil, and more down here. And this is the process by which it all gets done. This is what one of those drills looks like. And there's a lot of discussion about this, which is the casing, which needs to go down, down, down into the earth and that way to get to the oil. We have been doing this kind of mining for years. It's the lateral mining that we haven't done. We are building all sorts of pipelines to bring this product into our cities and off of our shores, because we probably will export it. We really need to understand, as planners, that energy is an industry. It's an industry. And we've forgotten, as planners, how to deal with industry, because we don't have a lot of it in the United States, at least dirty industry or contentious industry, such as we have with our energy. It's complex, it can be environmentally unfriendly, it's dispersed, and there are a lot of interdependent pieces. We need to know about this, and we need to get the education, we need to have shared vision, and we need to show by our knowledge that we understand how this works. Now, energy's always been dirty. You know what this is? These are the oil fields outside of Pittsburgh. They were really disgusting, right? That used to be a beautiful farmland until oil came. You know what this is? That's a nice residue from a coal mine. You know what all these pink little spots are up here? These are all the places our government has identified as needing cleanup because of things like this. Now, over time, we have found ways to reduce risks with the production of energy. Not perfectly. We've done a lot of damage to ourselves, but we have the capacity through our regulatory and through our education system to deal with energy. And we've had to, because we wouldn't have a $15 trillion economy if we hadn't done that. And so we've done it. So the question is for us today, what do we need to do in the future to understand and manage this new source of energy that we're hearing so much about, we know nothing about as planners, but we ought to. Maybe I'm underestimating what we all know. I apologize if I am. But we need to be in that conversation. You can't control it if you're not in it. And here you see some of the aspects of the natural gas, which is, it is an industry. That's packing up. This is water storage. It's a drill. It's a compressor. Does terrible things to roads. It's very complex, but it does support new industries. If you look at Youngstown, Ohio, which is a city. Anybody here from Youngstown? Anybody know what Black Monday is? Black Monday occurred, I guess, 40 years ago when the last steel company closed in Youngstown. And that community has been grieving for 40 years over the closure of that industry because the town was built around that. Well, all of a sudden, they have seen some changes. And over here, on these 23 acres, which used to be a steel-related mill, they've got a new mill coming in that's building special smooth pipes for the natural gas industry. 100 jobs. They cleaned up the brownfield. And they've got another piece over here. The university's starting a program to educate the proper use of this particular product, and so forth. There's one group that is controversial, but it's taken a very interesting stand on how to manage the natural gas issue, and that's the Environmental Defense Fund. And they are putting enormous resources. They have several offices throughout the United States, particularly in Texas, New York, Pennsylvania, to work with state legislatures to make sure that the proper regulation is there for the integrity of the pipelines, for the integrity of the drills, for the treatment of the water. And they have a 5-point program, and the last piece of that program calls for responsible community and city planning. Where are we? Where are we? All right, so it's time to think about design writ large. How are we going to do sustainable sites, low-impact development, inclusive, compact development? Well, in the 1960s, this crew began to think about new ways of urban design. And in fact, the book that we gave you is an attempt to say, hey, we need to be thinking about new ways of sustainable urban design, and we need to educate people differently. 4 years ago, Paul Davidoff stood in front, I don't think I have the number right, but anyway, in the 1960s, Paul Davidoff stood in front of the American Planning Association and called for a new role for planners, advocacy planning, and putting the people back in planning. Well, it's time for us, the thought leaders, you, the thought leaders who are here, to think about what the role for planning should be. We all are saying we want compact cities, but do we know what the impacts are there on energy? Have we done that work that's showing us what we're doing with energy? So we need to do that. We need to have an eco city, and we need to put some strong numbers into this, and other boxes that have to do with how we consume power and how we use our oil. Lots of people are thinking about this around the world. You have the Cities Alliance that's thinking about it. You have the OECD. You have the World Bank. You have APEC. So there's knowledge out there thinking about it, but we need to connect with it. We need to have new partners. We need to talk to engineers. We need to talk to geologists, to investors. That's just a short list. And we need to recast our assets. We have phenomenal assets. We can visualize. We can analyze. We're really sensitive to holistic approaches, and we can communicate. And we need to get that knowledge that will allow us to leap off into this pond and create the cities of tomorrow. These folks all had big ideas, and I sure hope that you will join me in creating more big ideas so that we will have the world that we want to hand on to our children. Thank you.
Eugenie has agreed to take a few questions, and so I will start off with one while you think of some. A few years ago, Dr. Stephen Chu, now the U.S. Energy Secretary, spoke at a conference that APA co-sponsored. And he talked about the fact that most of human progress over the last 150 years is because we've learned how to capture and use fossil fuel. By his estimate, every single person in the industrialized world now has the equivalent of 100 servants. That's the sort of metric. And so he looked out at the audience and he asked the question, how many servants are you willing to give up? And everybody kind of gulped and thought about that, and then he asked a second question. And he said, who are we to tell the developing world that they should forego their servants? So I have a question for Jeannie. Given the lack of a coherent energy policy in this country, we can go into all the political reasons why that's the case. This is a conference on policy here in Washington, of course. But what do you think the chances might be that we can provide the leadership that we need to provide, given all the facts and figures you've shown, so that we are showing the world how one can still get the things that are needed for not only just survival, but for prosperity, so that we can have that conversation with the developing world and not just looking as though we used our servants and now we don't want them to have theirs.
Well, I think there are two things we have to do. First of all, we have to educate ourselves. We have to really, I just gave you a very superficial view of energy. We need to really understand, we need to talk to the people who are involved in this particular activity and understand how it works, and then take our craft and use our craft within this conversation about energy in the United States first. What do you mean tell the developing world? It's the United States. We're the big, you remember that map I showed you with our big fat economy and our big fat energy consumption. And he's right. Are we going to give up those servants? I don't know. We have to, as designers, figure out how to do that. Figure out what it means to have a compact city and how you translate that into dollars so that it becomes more than just an idea that we talk about in front of each other largely, because what's being built around the United States these days is not necessarily a compact city. So we need to find the value proposition in energy, efficiency, conservation, and new energies, and managing energies. But we can't do that until we know what we're talking about. So we need to educate ourselves, and then we need a I hate to say this, a Manhattan Project. Planners and energy. I think we'll call it a Washington Project. I'm from Manhattan, so I think I think we have to wake up and smell the coffee. We spend an awful lot of time worrying about the width of streets and sidewalks. We ought to be worrying about that, of course, for aesthetic reasons, of course, for social reasons of getting people out, but also we need to layer on the metrics of what this means, and we need to communicate this information to the public so it's meaningful, so the decisions will be taken. Not easy.
Scott has a hand mic if someone has a question. We do want to get your question on the video. All of our Burnham lectures will be put on the internet, so you'll be able to not only come to one in person here, but watch others as they occur around the country.
In thinking back at my graduate education, we talked about oil and the end of oil, and technology's changed a lot of things. And how do you see the interrelationship between planning, where we're trying to look into the future, with the amount of technology changes that can be just total paradigm shifters, and how planners can really be involved in technological innovation and connected to that, because that really, the technological change can really define some of the futures we have. And it's not a real solid connection.
Well, we have to understand the technology. We have to understand how to harness it. I mean, it's fairly basic. And even though peak oil isn't what's being talked about, expensive oil is being what's talked about. And so the pocketbook is going to affect changes as well. And we need to anticipate some of these things so that we have some answers as to how to address what has to happen. It's going to happen.
Back here.
We talked about innovative technology. Well, we have technology that's existed for a long time that I don't believe we've actually gotten behind in trying to push the education on that. For instance, the Gemini space missions, they didn't take potable water. They created their own water through a chemical reaction of hydrogen and oxygen. So water, think of that in a different term of renewable resource. It's not being renewed naturally, but by a chemical reaction. Where can we have the investiture in that? That's the space shuttle that got out of space on gasoline. So, with the political will, I think we need a political will for that. When President Kennedy said we're going to be in the moon by the end of this decade, that was political will. We need to be able to get the same type of political will today that can say we're going to have these types of resources and make them available within the next decade. So how do we do that?
Well, we as individuals don't do that. If we wait for our leaders, we have to make ourselves knowledgeable enough so that we can push our leaders and make our leaders respond to us. But as long as we're kind of comfortable going along as we are, business as usual, there's no imperative.
Very nice talk. Enjoyed it. I'm struck by the fact that, number one, the idea of having metrics for what kind of energy demand is going to be created by building the cities we want, I think is a terrific idea, because all of this starts with communications. But I also recognize, working in Illinois, for example, our enabling legislation for planning is ancient and gives us very few tools to work with. I'm curious what you think about what needs to be done to the infrastructure of planning and enabling legislation to let us become much more aggressive in that particular energy planning area.
That's a really good question. So I think we have to analyze the industry and consider it an industry. And one of the things that we know is it's a very dispersed industry, so it's out in the country, it's in the city. We need to work on the same metropolitan activities, and it seems to me that where we can create common interests in a region, we're able to make progress. So we're not going to do this overnight, but we need to be smart and think about the allies and think about how we can use this to underpin the growing consensus around issues, and then apply our tools, whether it's zoning, whether it's urban design, whether it's community development, whatever, to this particular arena.
In the face of all that you've presented, and the fact that it takes cultures time to adapt to change, why is the topic of reducing the rate of population growth off the table?
Actually, when people move into cities, they have fewer children, and population growth takes care of itself from that point of view, because oftentimes their lives are healthier, they don't have as much space, they have a little more security in their economy, or different kind of jobs, or whatever. Or women get education. If you educate a woman, she'll have fewer children. All of those things are happening. You think that's funny? It's true. Absolutely true. All of these things can happen and do happen in cities. So the forecasts that you see are taking into consideration a dropping fertility rate. And in fact, if you read the UN studies, they couch it with, if our assumptions don't work here, the fertility rate doesn't drop, then we'll have a different population. So there is some sort of natural activity that occurs.
I was just wondering, how much should the focus be on trying to shift to more, in terms of managing the different types of energy, how much should the focus be in terms of shifting to renewables or that type of thing versus looking at the root cause of why we use so much energy? I mean, you talked about water and electricity, but in terms of buildings and the amount of energy that buildings produce, or New York City only recycles something like 15% of their trash, how much energy can we focus on trying to reduce our consumption, whether it's consumers and residences or businesses and industry, or creating legislation to kind of address that part of the puzzle?
It's not a binary. It's not an either or. It's a full court press on every single thing that we can think of, whether it's reduction, whether it's efficiency, whether it's find the interoperability mechanisms for renewables, find ways to produce renewables at mass, how to deal with the carbon sequestration in coal. One of the big things that EDF is doing is working on methane leakage on natural gas. So I mean, this is a massive effort that we need to engage in. It's not just a few of us planners thinking this is a good idea. We need to find partners and allies and develop a common vision around this topic. It's too important to leave alone, and it's too important to be binary about it.
Eugenie, thank you for the presentation. You may not know this, but tomorrow the board will be adopting a policy guide on energy. And so it's, I think, quite topical and timely.
My question is... What's the policy?
Yes, it's a policy. Now, there's no question that you've elevated the importance of this not just to be a policy guide, but really to address a sense of urgency that we need to get started. That is for the professionals. Based upon your work and your knowledge of the planning institutions and graduate planning programs, in terms of the young professionals coming in or in school, are you aware of how this is now being taken seriously or discussed at that level, so that while at the professional level we need to get busy and be more bold and courageous about making this an issue, incorporating into our comprehensive plans and seeing more policy, but on that level, are you aware that it's being more discussed or discussed at the graduate planning programs?
It is not being systematically discussed. It needs to be. That's why I'm here saying it. But everyone's just waking up to this, I think. And we want to get in the conversation. You want to be vigilant, you want to control it, and we don't want to get too comfortable. So.
I think we have time for one more question here, and then we will have a reception, and we can continue the conversation at that time.
Eugenie, for about the last 4 decades, we have watched and often wrung our hands in some semblance of feeling of helplessness as we watch continuous disinvestment in our urban core areas. I think my question is now how do we manage the reverse of that? How do we manage an accelerated rate of urban morphology and deconstruction, if you will, of areas that will be of lower density and perhaps lower desirability as we move into the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years?
Well, there are many policy activities that could occur, but they wouldn't be very popular. For example, if we put a good gas tax on gasoline, that would certainly help matters. Remember 1974 when we had, you probably don't, you're too young, but anyway, we had gas shortages, and oh boy, people moved into, didn't use as much gasoline and so forth. But we need to be active in the advocacy area to have the real costs of energy reflected. That's not a popular move, but I think we can take heart in, I see an awful lot of young planners who come through our program, and they are very, they're very focused on living close to the core and living in more dense conditions and not having that long drive and so on and so forth. So I think there is a slow change that's occurring among the youth, but we have to make it affordable because oftentimes the inner cores are not affordable. So that's an issue.
Thank you very much again, Jeannie. And as you noted, we started this series in July with the 3 presidents of AIA, APA, and the ASLA, and you've shown how you played off of that tonight. We much appreciated that. But what we even more appreciated is the challenge that you've given us all to continue to learn and to continue to be leaders in our communities on what is, for many of us, a new area. And so you've given a challenge to the future lecturers in this series to maintain the high standards now with these first 2. And we look forward to continuing to work with you on the energy issue as well as other issues. So thanks for taking your time and preparing this presentation as part of the fall leadership meetings and the federal policy and program briefing here in Washington, D.C. at this incredible building, the National Building Museum. Thank you again.